I'm Greg Jarrett.
I'm Sandra Smith.
I'm Charles Payne, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, June 23rd, 2021. I'm Jessica Rosenthal. Migrants continue to arrive at the U.S.-Mexico border, and border state counties, law enforcement, and landowners say they're overwhelmed.
Every single law enforcement person we've talked to, whether it's Border Patrol, a state trooper, a county sheriff, they're all saying the same thing. They have never seen it this bad in their entire lives.
I'm Dave Anthony. A pandemic trend is reversing. More people are returning to the office, no longer working from home, but not all.
People are deciding that who they were pre-pandemic is not who they want to be moving forward. They may want a total lifestyle change, and that could be where they live, that could be where they work. People are, in some cases, really changing their minds about things, and I think it's a little hard to go back.
And I'm Rachel Campos-Duffy. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
Historically high numbers of migrants continue to come to the U.S.-Mexico border. Border agents reported more than 180,000 contacts with migrants at the southern border in May, up from 178,000 in April. And while fewer children have been coming as of late, family units and especially single adults still arrive in droves. Vice President Kamala Harris, who's been tasked with addressing the root causes of migration, traveled to Mexico and Guatemala earlier this month.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come.
Some border state governors have had enough, saying their counties are being overrun. They blame a lack of action from the federal government and insist that Harris needs to visit the border to understand the issue. Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Arizona Governor Doug Ducey signed a border state pact over the surge, and Abbott said last week,
Texas will build a border wall in our state to help secure our border.
He asked for other states to send help in the form of personnel and said the goal will be to have state, county, and city law enforcement make border-related arrests using trespassing laws, saying that counties along the border are being overrun with migrants.
You have these big groups of like 50 to 100 Venezuelans just walking across the Rio Grande, led by a smuggler.
Bill Melugin is a Fox News correspondent who's been at the border in the Rio Grande Valley sector for several weeks now.
Who has no fear at all of being caught. You know, he just walks the people across the river, drops them off on the American side, just feet away from law enforcement, and has no fear of being caught. And then we saw the exact same thing happening here on Friday night. We went out on a state trooper ride-along in Roma, Texas, right here in the Rio Grande Valley, and we were watching human smugglers using rafts to literally do a shuttle service for migrants from the Mexican side of the river to the American side of the river, and just dropping them off right in front of the National Guard, right in front of Border Patrol, right in front of state troopers. And the smugglers were very confident, very brazen. They were laughing, they were making jokes, they took their head coverings off. They were not afraid of being caught. And I talked to a state trooper and said, you know, why are you guys not going after one of these smugglers? They're just feet away from you guys, and they're coming to the American side. And they said because it's a safety issue for the migrants. Essentially, they're worried that if they try to make a move on one of these guys, because they're shuttling women and young children, they'll take it out on the migrants and they'll flip the rafts over, or they'll dump people in the water, and instead of trying to get the smugglers, they'll turn it into, you know, a rescue operation trying to save these migrants. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation.
I follow your Twitter feed regularly. You have some just insane pictures and storytelling going on there. You wrote in one post that people actually asked you to call the Border Patrol for them. You have other shots of smugglers just ferrying people across hour after hour, as you said, and other pictures of just men packed into the back of these enclosed trucks in like over 100-degree heat. I mean, this is overwhelming to see, I imagine.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. I guess one of the more wild things was on Tuesday of last week in Alton, Texas, which is like 20 minutes north of where we are. We got tipped off to a human smuggling stash house bust, and we got there right as Border Patrol and state troopers were breaking it up. And there were 107 migrants who were being kept at that stash house, and there was no air conditioning. There was only one restroom. It's scorching hot and humid out here in Texas. They were all crammed on top of each other, and what the cartels do, what the smugglers do, is they bring these folks into the country, and then they'll put them in these stash houses, cram them on top of each other, and they'll hold them there until they're ready to move them further into the interior of the United States. And what was wild about this one was spray painted in graffiti on the wall of the stash house were the letters CDG, which law enforcement sources tell us stands for Cartel del Golfo, which is the Gulf Cartel, and that's the Mexican drug cartel that operates in the Reynosa area, in the Mexican side of the border, south of where we are right now. And they're big into both human smuggling and drug trafficking. And yes, when you a couple times this week, we had large groups of migrants just approach us, and there were no border patrol anywhere because they're stretched so thin they can't be everywhere at once. So yeah, the migrants come up to us and say, where donde está la migra? Where's border patrol? And we have to be like, we don't know. They might be here soon. But it kind of just goes to show, just how overwhelmed and undermanned Border Patrol is in this sector, because Rio Grande Valley is totally overrun right now, and it's the busiest sector along the entire U.S.-Mexico border.
It brings up another point, Bill, and that is that there are sort of two groups, it feels like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, of people who want to announce themselves. They want to claim asylum. They want to go through some process knowing that they will be allowed to stay in the United States pending their case. And another group of people who absolutely do not want to get caught and scurry across, at night or in a way to hide. Which group do you sense is bigger, and who's falling into which category? I imagine the people who are coming who don't want to announce themselves maybe either have a record here, maybe have, for some reason obviously don't want to claim asylum and go through a process and be on the books.
There's a very clear distinction going on between the folks coming over. There are the family units, the moms, the kids, the folks who are all willing to just turn themselves in. They come here and they are looking for Border Patrol because they want to give themselves up. That's the overwhelming majority of what we're seeing. Then on the other hand, you've got the runners and the folks who do not want to be caught. And typically what happens is when those family units come across and give themselves the smugglers and the cartels will send those family units over, and then they know Border Patrol responds to them, and they got to process, 100 people at a time, and it sucks up their resources. So while that's happening, then they'll send the people who do not want to be caught elsewhere along the border, and that's when those runners will come across. So we've got in recent weeks some pretty wild video from our Fox drone of those runners literally just making a run on the border, just taking off running in all directions as Border Patrol is trying to chase them down. They're able to catch some of them, but not all of them.
I know, Bill, aside from migrants, you have talked to some elected officials, you've talked to sheriff's officials, law enforcement, not just the law enforcement at the border in terms of Border Patrol, but more inland, right? The county operators and also maybe state officials. What are they telling you? What's most striking to you about what they're sharing with you?
So universally, every single law enforcement person we've talked to, whether it's Border Patrol, a state trooper, a county sheriff, they're all saying the same thing. They have never seen it this bad in their entire lives. And they believe it's going to get worse because they think Title 42 is going to get dropped pretty soon. Because Title 42 is, of course, what the government is using to expel people from the country based off COVID-19 precautions, while as vaccination numbers go up and things start reopening and the ports of entry start reopening, there's no longer going to be a justification to expel people on the basis of COVID-19.
Now, some state governors have responded to the request from Governors Abbott and Ducey to send resources. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis said he would send law enforcement personnel. So did the governor of Nebraska, Pete Ricketts.
What we've seen with the Biden administration is really an utter disregard for the security of our nation by rushing to undo the Trump-era policies that have reduced illegal immigration along our southwest border. And we can see now that we've got an immigration crisis there. In May, it was 180,000 contacts of people trying to cross illegally. And if you can contrast that to May of 2020, it was 23,000. So a significant increase. And if you want to look back to the previous record, it was 144,000. So we've never seen this kind of illegal immigration across our southwest border. And that does not impact just the border states. It impacts all states as we see illegal immigrants then continue to spread out across our country. And so the state of Nebraska received a request from Texas to be able to help out through our emergency management system. And we are sending 25 state patrol troopers down for a period of 16 days to be able to help out in the Del Rio area with law enforcement operations to be able to help the state of Texas manage this huge illegal crossing at our borders.
You said it impacts all states, the fact that people are coming, that this many people are coming. Do you guys in Nebraska have a large population of undocumented folks? Why are you invested here?
We actually had a situation in one of our rural towns where we had a number of folks who had come here illegally being really extorted and taken advantage of by the fact that they were here illegally, having their paychecks intercepted, having their paychecks basically skimmed so that they weren't getting full value for what they were working. And that's just one example of the human cost that goes along with people coming here illegally. And we can also see it through the huge number of unaccompanied minors that are crossing the border. There was an article in our paper about a father from Honduras who tried to cross, was caught, returned, and then sent his 7-year-old daughter ahead without him. That kind of thing is just a human tragedy, and it was all precipitated by the Biden administration and their bad policies. So we as the state feel like we have to step up where the federal government is failing.
Governor Abbott's talking about, making arrests, building a wall even. I think he's even asked private property owners to donate their land to that effort. And we've heard this debate before that immigration and border defense, is under federal, not state purview. So what happens here legally? Can this even get done, these sorts of efforts like building a wall at the state level? Or is it maybe a waste of time and money to even try this? Will it legally hold up?
Well, the fact of the matter is we have an immigration crisis on this border. And Governor Abbott's team, I'm sure, is more versed in what they want to accomplish. We're providing some of the extra manpower to serve them through this emergency management request. So I would defer to their team with regard to this, but there's no doubt the federal government has really dropped the ball. The Biden administration is not doing its job. Vice President Harris, who is supposed to be in charge of this, hasn't even bothered to visit the border. So this is a huge failure on the federal government's part, and that leaves states left to trying to come up with whatever solutions they can to be able to stem these sorts of crises.
The Biden administration has argued that that Vice President Harris's, project or goal here is to handle and tackle long-term migration issues, like the root causes of these migration issues. But a lot of folks, and you've seen them too, Republican congresspeople going to the border, sort of angry that Vice President Harris hasn't visited the border. Why is it so important in your mind to see the what's happening for yourself? Like, why do the president or the vice president need to actually go to the border in order to deal with this problem? Because they could, I imagine, do a number of things that maybe even you would be happy with on this to tackle this issue without actually seeing it, right?
Well, certainly looking at the long-term causes is going to be important. But as an executive, you need to see firsthand what the short-term crisis is to be able to help cut through some of the red tape. This is something that I've learned as an executive over the course of the last 6.5 years in office as governor. And it's clear that the Biden administration does not have that executive experience to understand what they need to do to be able to not only assess the situation, but also show support for the people who are on the front line right now. They are being overwhelmed, and they need to know that their executive, their commander-in-chief is going to be there to be able to have their back, and that has been lacking. That has not happened.
Governor Pete Ricketts, thank you so much for your time.
Great. Hey, thank you very much for having me on.
This is Rachel Campos-Duffy with your Fox News commentary coming up.
We get the next employment report next week for June. The month before, 559,000 jobs were created, prompting President Biden to boast the economy has momentum, we're on the right track. But hiring's been less than expected in May and April, and 9 million people remain out of work, and there are almost as many job openings, with Republicans claiming $300 a week and extra federal unemployment benefits that 26 states are ending are to blame for people not wanting to work. GOP Congresswoman Mariannette Miller-Meeks told Fox just the other day,
very troublesome for small businesses, troublesome for families trying to get by, coming out of the pandemic. So I think that there is a lot of concern.
One trend in all this, more people who worked from home in these COVID times are back in the office.
Well, for starters, 38% of Americans worked from home at some point since the pandemic was declared in March 2020.
Ted Rossman is a senior industry analyst for Bankrate.com.
32% started working from home because of COVID. Another 6% already worked from home. So among that, roughly 1/3 of Americans who started working at home during the pandemic, 45% of them are still working from home full time.
Okay.
So a little over half have gone back to the office. It's very split, though. 27% back in the office full time, 28% back in the office part of the time. It really depends a lot on the industry, the employer. I would tell you, though, that I've actually been surprised how many people are going back to the office relatively quickly. We've seen a big uptick here in the past few weeks and months. And I actually think that working from home will probably be a perk for the lucky few moving forward. I think that by and large, most people are headed back to the office most of the time. Maybe you can wrangle a day or two a week at home, but I'm sensing a pretty strong return to the office culture.
There was a lot of Zoom fatigue that happened for a while. People were kind of sick of that. But at the same time, the not having to go through the daily grind of commuting certainly was a plus for many of these workers who may have to go back and deal with the commute again.
It was huge financially and more intangibly in terms of the benefits of less stress and more family time, more freedom, more sleep. Specifically on the financial side, 57% of people who worked from home during COVID said that it actually helped their finances, and only 10% said it was negative. And the biggest positives that I see are the commute, for sure, food, clothes, childcare. I think there's a lot of financial benefits to working from home.
That, though, is for a certain section of the workforce, maybe the white-collar side, people who were rather in the higher income area to begin with, right?
That's exactly how it broke down. Yeah, so only about 1/3 of Americans started working from home during COVID. By and large, it was higher income households. 54% with annual household incomes over $80,000 a year worked from home at some point during the pandemic. There's about half of that for middle income households. And it was only 21% of households that make under $40,000 a year. So it did tend to be higher income folks. And the age breakdown is interesting, too. We actually find that young adults, so Gen Z and millennials, they're the more likely to say that it saved them money working from home.
When it comes to those workers as well, they seem to like the remote work more than, say, the boomers, right?
In some respects, it's kind of a mixed bag because, I mentioned that young adults said that they saved the most money working from home.
Right.
We also find, though, that young adults are the most likely to already be back in the office. And I think there's some element of to each their own. Somebody who's more extroverted, somebody who maybe lives alone, they might be more eager to get back into the office. Early career workers, too, they benefit more from that mentor-mentee kind of relationship. It's a total mixed bag, though, because we also had baby boomers that were the most likely to tell us that they missed the networking and the camaraderie of the office. So I think that it's a little bit hard to paint with too broad of a brush on this one, because I do think it's very individualized to your personality, where you live, what industry you work in. I'm seeing that financial companies are more likely to be calling people back, whereas tech companies are more likely to say that work from home could be here to stay. I think it's something that could be very negotiable moving forward, that just like you might negotiate your salary and your vacation time, negotiating some kind of work from home arrangement could be attractive for some, whereas other people just can't wait to get back into the office.
I've heard anecdotes and people that I know who have been dealing with some people at work who are fighting the return, and also how it's been difficult for some companies to attract workers if they're not flexible. If they say you have to come to an office, it's making it tougher for them to find people who want to do that.
I've heard that too. Some people have moved, in particular to lower cost parts of the country, where if you can draw a big city salary and live somewhere with a lower cost of living and work remotely,
that
could be a win. Childcare is also a big wild card in this, because on the face of it, you would think that working from home helps lower your childcare expenses. But especially if you have young kids, they may still need a lot of supervision. Now we're heading into summer vacation, but even when schools were open, in some cases it was hybrid or fully remote. So I think the pandemic is having a lasting effect on childcare. And I think it could also be a great reset in the sense of some people are deciding that who they were pre-pandemic is not who they want to be moving forward. They may want a total lifestyle change, and that could be where they live, that could be where they work. People are, in some cases, really changing their minds about things. And I think it's a little hard to go back. I could tell you personally, I commuted an hour and a half each way, and I haven't done that in more than a year. And it really is a big time saving.
It's unbelievable to not have to spend 2 or 3 hours a day in the car. And not only that, it's not just the time in the car, it's the quality of the time in the car if you're stressed out with traffic.
It's a huge win for some people. I really like the work from home lifestyle. I'm mindful of the fact that not everybody thinks that way. Even at my company, there's some people that can't wait to go back, and there's going to be a voluntary reopening soon, because that's the other thing, is that employers are still struggling with the COVID side of this. Well, we're thankful for vaccines and we've seen rapid improvement. It's still kind of a gray area legally, where what can you require? Can you make people get vaccinated? Probably not. Can you ask if they've been vaccinated? Even that can be a little bit of a squishy area. So what I think a lot of companies are doing is more of the soft opening, and it's kind of, if you want to come back, we're here. If you're not, we'll give you a little more time. I think we're kind of in this in-between right now. I think by the fall, and certainly by the turn of the year, we may see some more progress on this. But right now, there are some people who can't wait to get back. There's some people who never want to go back. Some people are leaving their jobs because they've really become accustomed to this new lifestyle. And they say, I don't want to spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week in the office anymore. So I really think that this will have some broader ripple effects for the job market, and even for things like housing.
What about, though, office space? Like in the cities where people have been commuting to, if fewer people go to the office, companies don't need as much space. So what does that do for the commercial real estate market? I mean, landlords, it's not a good time.
It could save companies a lot of money if they can get out of these leases. That's the thing. A lot of these corporate leases are very long term, so you might not be able to just flick a switch. But yes, some companies can realize savings. That really hurts landlords and the commercial side of things. You think about also all the infrastructure, dry cleaners, other people that kind of support the office work directly or indirectly. Cleaning services would be another example. Yeah, there's definite ripple effects here. I think some companies are calling people back in part because they feel like we've got all this space, we might as well use it. And there is a control element to having your staff on site. There can be benefits too. I think the hybrid model may work for a lot of people, and it may require some different choices. Like, for example, if the staff is only in the office 3 or 4 days a week, maybe those are the days that are more communal. Maybe those are the days that you have more meetings and you get people together. And then the days that are more independent work, well, maybe that you can just do from home. We may see Mondays and Fridays become big work from home days. But I do think that we're seeing a lot more returning to the office now than we projected even a few months ago.
Those workers returning to offices is good news for cities that missed their commuters, like New York, which has more crowded subways and buses, also probably because more people are vaccinated and feel safer using public transportation. Now, the MTA reports subway and bus and commuter rail passenger numbers hit pandemic highs last Friday, but that's only about half the ridership before COVID. Still, it is much-needed revenue, and more office workers is also good for city restaurants that rely on the business lunch crowd.
Very important. Yeah, I think that is an area that has been struggling and will probably be slower to bounce back. I think on a similar note, we could talk about business travel. We could talk about conferences and trade shows. And we're just starting to see really the early stages of some of the recovery there, because that's the other thing, that just because something is open doesn't mean people are necessarily going to go to it. You might be more likely to go into the office and work in small groups or work by yourself as opposed to doing a big team lunch or conference or trip or something like that. So I do think that there's going to be kind of an uneven pace to this.
What about the workforce that never could work from home? You know, there's a lot of people who have jobs it's impossible to do them from home. Has there been any resentment from them to people who've been able to stay home and it seems like they're having a fun time?
You know, that's an interesting point. I mean, there certainly could be. We're thankful for so many aspects of this improvement and the reopening. But yeah, it's been such a difficult time for people that work in restaurants and other in-person settings that have really been hurt by this. So I'm sure if you run a restaurant or you work in a restaurant in a central business district, I'm sure you're hoping that everybody comes back and spends money and tips generously. And ultimately, this is really an intertwined ecosystem. But something that we found on many fronts during the pandemic is that inequality has been exacerbated. We've seen that with who's able to work from home. We've seen that with job losses. It's been very uneven. And I think that this has really amplified some existing trends. But clearly, if you're a well-paid work from home office type worker, your finances are probably better now than they were pre-pandemic because you've been saving more, spending less, still been banking a healthy salary. Sadly, there are many at the other end of the spectrum who've really struggled through this. So, I think there will be winners and losers, and it kind of remains to be seen how it all shakes out.
Ted Rossman, Senior Industry Analyst at Bankrate.com. We thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Fox Nation presents podcasts Women of the Bible Speak.
I'm Shannon Bream, host of Fox News at Night and author of the new book, Women of the Bible Speak, the wisdom of 16 women and their lessons for today. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, FoxNewsPodcast.com, or wherever you download your podcasts.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Rachel Campos-Duffy.
What's on your mind?
When I hosted Fox News Primetime on Fox News Channel, I interviewed an amazing guest named Helen Raleigh. Raleigh grew up in China and wrote a very thoughtful piece in the Federalist after woke liberals decided to cancel Dr. Seuss. When Raleigh immigrated to the United States from China, one of the things she most loved about America was children's literature. She loved how American children's stories were full of optimism. They were fun and whimsical, and they encouraged children to dream and use their imagination. It was so different from the dark, ideologically Marxist children's stories she was exposed to in communist China. As a Chinese immigrant, Helen is deeply worried that political correctness, cancel culture, and the woke gatekeepers of America's publishing world are cultivating the same propaganda literature of her Marxist homeland. One of the few silver linings of the pandemic is that parents of all political persuasions across America are beginning to wake up to the indoctrination their children are being exposed to through teachers, librarians, textbooks, cartoons, movies, and social media. Frustrated and feeling helpless, parents are finally starting to show up to school board meetings. They're pulling their kids out of woke schools that were teaching them to hate their country, each other, and if they are white, themselves. This is all good. But as parents focus on their schools and the usual Hollywood and big tech suspects, the gatekeepers of America's children's literature, publishers, editors, and big box bookstores like Amazon and Barnes & Noble, fly under the radar. They're the ones that decide what gets published, canceled, or suggested when you are shopping for children's books online. Only liberal authors who meet the narrow woke definition of diversity are published or promoted. For them, inclusion, ironically, does not include authors who don't agree with their politics or worldview. Books with traditional or conservative messages are deliberately excluded. Most troubling is that today, in the name of racial and historical sensitivity, books that are culturally important to America, ones that once shaped our children's minds, such as The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, To Kill a Mockingbird, and yes, Dr. Seuss, are being canceled and outright banned. As an avid, lifelong collector of children's books and a mom who loves to read to her own children, Raleigh's answers to this disturbing trend resonated with me. One solution, she explained, is to create your own freedom library at your home. How do you start? It's easy, says Rally. Start with all the books progressives want to ban. With America's librarians and Amazon's Jeff Bezos leading the charge in literary censorship, I suggest quickly purchasing those little treasures you grew up reading and loving quickly before some make-work diversity nonprofit decides that Treasure Island or Nancy Drew are too offensive. During our primetime interview, I asked Rally to give me her list of books for a Freedom Library. In addition, I have my own list to add to her essential children's books that every parent or grandparent should introduce to the young, curious, and impressionable minds in their lives.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.